You know that feeling when your entire world collapses in a single second? When everything you've built, every late night, every sacrifice, just vanishes? I'm Maya, and I lived that nightmare. But what my supervisor didn't know was that destroying my work would be the biggest mistake of his career. It was a Tuesday morning. I remember because Tuesdays were our project review days. I'd been working at Horizon Tech for 3 years, and for the past 12 months, I'd poured my soul into something extraordinary. A software algorithm that could revolutionize how our company handled client data processing. It wasn't just work anymore. It was my baby. My creation. I walked into the office that morning with my usual coffee, ready to present the final phase of my project to the team. The excitement was bubbling inside me. This was it. The moment that would define my career. I'd tested everything 100 times. It was perfect. Flawless. Ready to change everything for our company. But when I sat down at my desk and opened my laptop, my heart stopped. The main project folder. It was empty. Completely empty. 12 months of code, documentation, research, testing reports, gone. Just like that. My hands started shaking. This couldn't be real. I checked the backup drives. Empty. Cloud storage? Wiped clean. Every single trace of my work had been systematically deleted. I felt like I couldn't breathe. Panic rose in my chest like a tidal wave. I immediately called IT support, my voice trembling as I explained what happened. They ran diagnostics for 2 hours. And then, they found it. The deletion wasn't accidental. It wasn't a system glitch or a virus. Someone with administrative access had manually deleted everything, and they'd covered their tracks professionally. My supervisor, Richard Brennan, called me into his office an hour later. I walked in, expecting support, maybe even concern. Instead, he sat behind his massive desk with this cold, almost satisfied expression on his face. He didn't even look up from his computer screen when I entered. Maya, we need to talk about your project, he said flatly. I stood there, still in shock, and managed to say, Richard, someone deleted everything. An entire year of work is just gone. IT confirmed it was an internal deletion. We need to find out who. He cut me off. I know who deleted it. My blood ran cold. The way he said it. So casual. So emotionless. What do you mean, you know? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Richard finally looked at me, and I'll never forget the expression on his face. It was triumph mixed with cruelty. I deleted it, Maya. Every single file. The room started spinning. I gripped the back of the chair in front of me to steady myself. You. What? Why would you do that? He leaned back in his chair, fingers interlaced behind his head like he was discussing the weather. Your project was going in the wrong direction. The approach was flawed. The timeline was unrealistic. Rather than waste more company resources, I made an executive decision to terminate it. Terminate it? I could feel tears burning behind my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. Not in front of him. You could have just told me to stop. You didn't have to destroy everything. Richard shrugged. Actually shrugged. Like my entire year of work meant nothing. Consider it a fresh start. If you want to continue working on something similar, you can begin again from scratch. With proper oversight this time. I stood there in stunned silence. This man had just admitted to destroying 12 months of my life, and he was acting like he'd done me a favor. The worst part? I knew exactly what this was really about. 3 months ago, I'd rejected his advances at a company dinner. He'd gotten too close, made inappropriate comments, suggested we discuss my career growth at his place. I'd politely but firmly declined, and kept my distance ever since. This was revenge, pure and simple. He couldn't handle the rejection, so he found another way to hurt me. You can leave now, Maya, he said, turning back to his computer. And close the door behind you. I walked out of his office in a daze. My colleagues looked at me with a mixture of pity and curiosity. Word had already spread about my deleted project. But nobody knew the truth. Nobody knew that our respected supervisor had just committed corporate sabotage because his ego couldn't handle rejection. That night, I sat in my apartment staring at the blank walls. I felt hollow, defeated. Everything I'd worked for was gone, and there was nothing I could do about it. Richard had all the power. He was protected by his position, his reputation, his connections. Who would believe me if I spoke up? It would be his word against mine, and we all know how those situations usually end. But as I sat there in the darkness, something shifted inside me. The grief started transforming into something else, something harder, sharper. I wasn't going to let him win. Not like this. If Richard Brennan thought he'd broken me, he was dead wrong. The next morning, I came to work with a plan. If Richard wanted to play dirty, I'd learn the rules of his game. But I'd play smarter. I started documenting everything. Every conversation, every email, every interaction with Richard got recorded in a private encrypted folder that I kept off company servers. I wasn't going to give him another chance to destroy evidence. For 2 weeks, I played the obedient employee. I smiled when he made condescending remarks about my fresh start. I nodded when he assigned me meaningless tasks far below my skill level. I watched as he started taking credit for ideas I'd mentioned in team meetings. He was testing how far he could push me, seeing if I'd break completely or fight back. But I was doing something else during those 2 weeks. Something he never saw coming. I was rebuilding my project, but not on company systems. Every night after work, I'd go home and reconstruct what I could remember. The core algorithm, the framework, the innovative approaches that made my work special. It wasn't identical to what I'd lost, but it was close. And in some ways, it was even better because I was refining it as I rebuilt. I also started reaching out to old colleagues, people who'd left Horizon Tech over the years. And that's when I discovered something shocking. I wasn't Richard's first victim. Not even close. A former developer named Lisa had left the company 2 years ago. When I contacted her, she went silent for a moment after I mentioned Richard's name. Then she told me her story. Richard had sabotaged her project too, but differently. He'd taken her work, presented it as his own to upper management, and when she tried to speak up, he'd created a paper trail making it look like she was underperforming. She left before he could fire her. Then there was Marcus. Richard had manipulated him into missing critical deadlines by feeding him wrong information, then blamed him when the project failed. Marcus's reputation was destroyed, and he ended up leaving tech entirely. And Jennifer. Sweet, brilliant Jennifer who'd been mentored by Richard early in her career. He'd made promises about promotions, about supporting her growth. But when she outshined him in a client presentation, he turned on her. Suddenly, every project she touched got reassigned. Every achievement went unrecognized. She developed anxiety so severe she had to take medical leave and never came back. Richard Brennan wasn't just a bad supervisor. He was a pattern. A predator who systematically destroyed anyone he perceived as a threat or anyone who rejected his control. I had my proof of his character, but I needed something more concrete. Something that would expose him without question. That's when I remembered something. 3 months ago, before everything went wrong, I'd sent Richard a detailed progress report on my project. In that email, I'd outlined the potential value of my algorithm to the company. I'd even mentioned that if implemented correctly, it could attract attention from competitors in our industry. Richard had replied to that email with enthusiasm. He'd called my work revolutionary and exactly what Horizon Tech needs to stay ahead of the competition. He'd promised to present it to the board himself. That email chain was still in my work account, and it proved that Richard had recognized the value of my project before deciding to destroy it. But I needed more. I needed to understand why he'd really done it. Was it just about rejecting his advances? Or was there something bigger? I started paying closer attention to Richard's behavior in meetings. And that's when I noticed something strange. He'd been having a lot of private calls lately, stepping out of meetings, closing his office door for hours. It wasn't normal, even for him. One evening, I stayed late at the office. Most people had gone home, but Richard was still in his office with the door closed. I could hear him talking on the phone, his voice muffled but animated. I shouldn't have done what I did next, but I was beyond caring about his privacy after what he'd done to me. I moved closer to his door, just close enough to hear fragments of his conversation, and what I heard made my blood run cold and my mind race at the same time. Exactly what they're looking for. Yes, the full algorithm. No, she won't be a problem. Already handled. Trust me. By the time anyone realizes, I'll be long gone. The contract with Vector Systems is almost finalized. Vector Systems, our biggest competitor. Richard wasn't just sabotaging employees. He was selling company secrets. My project specifically. Suddenly, everything made sense. Richard hadn't deleted my work because it was flawed. He deleted it from company servers because he was stealing it. He was going to take my algorithm to Vector Systems and pass it off as his own work. That's why he didn't want me to rebuild it. That's why he wanted me to start fresh with something completely different. He was covering his tracks while he committed corporate espionage. My hands were shaking as I walked back to my desk. This was bigger than I'd imagined. Richard wasn't just a petty tyrant. He was a criminal. And he was about to sell out our entire company for a paycheck from our competitors. I sat down and took a deep breath. This changed everything. I'd been planning to expose Richard's pattern of workplace abuse. But now I had something much more powerful. I had evidence of actual corporate theft. And I had the one thing he thought he'd destroyed: my project itself, rebuilt and sitting safely on my personal drives at home. That night, I made a decision. I wasn't going to report Richard to HR or upper management at Horizon Tech. They might cover it up to avoid scandal. They might not believe me. Richard had connections with several board members. He'd been with the company for 12 years. I'd been there for 3. The odds weren't in my favor if I went through official channels. No, I was going to do something different. Something that would guarantee results. I was going to contact Vector Systems directly. Not to sell them my work, but to expose Richard's plan before he could execute it. And I was going to do it in a way that would benefit me while destroying his schemes completely. Some people might call what I was planning revenge. I called it justice with a strategic advantage. The next morning, I researched everything I could about Vector Systems, their leadership team, their recent projects, their company values, which ironically emphasized integrity and innovation through honest collaboration. Perfect. I found the email address for their chief technology officer, Dr. Sarah Chen. She had a reputation in the industry as someone who was brilliant, fair, and absolutely ruthless when it came to protecting her company's interests. If anyone would take corporate espionage seriously, it would be her. I spent an entire evening crafting the perfect email. It had to be professional, credible, and impossible to ignore. Here's what I sent. Dear Dr. Chen, my name is Maya Patel, and I'm a senior developer at Horizon Tech. I'm writing to inform you of a serious matter that affects both our companies. I have concrete evidence that Richard Brennan, a project supervisor at Horizon Tech, is currently negotiating to sell stolen proprietary technology to Vector Systems. The technology in question is a data processing algorithm that I personally developed over the past year. Mr. Brennan sabotaged my project internally and is attempting to pass this work off as his own to secure a position or contract with your company. I'm reaching out because I believe Vector Systems values ethical business practices. I have no interest in seeing my work stolen or in watching 2 companies get entangled in legal disputes over corporate espionage. I'm prepared to provide evidence of everything I've stated, including email trails, project documentation, and testimony from other employees who've been victimized by Mr. Sebeni's Brennan's pattern of behavior. I'm available to discuss this matter at your earliest convenience. Best regards, Maya Patel. I hovered over the send button for a full minute. Once I pressed it, there was no going back. This would set off a chain reaction I couldn't control. But when I thought about Richard's smug face, about Lisa and Marcus and Jennifer and everyone else he'd hurt, about the fact that he was literally trying to steal my year of work, I clicked send. 24 hours later, I received a response. Dr. Chen wanted to meet. In person. As soon as possible. We met at a neutral location, a quiet cafe downtown. Dr. Chen was exactly as I'd imagined. Sharp eyes, no-nonsense demeanor, and someone who clearly didn't tolerate games. She brought her head of legal with her, which told me she was taking this seriously. I spent 2 hours explaining everything. I showed them the email trails proving Richard had praised my project months ago. I provided testimony about his pattern of behavior with other employees. And most importantly, I showed them samples of my original work, the code I'd reconstructed, my design documents, my research notes, all time-stamped and verified as my own creation. Then I told them about the conversation I'd overheard, about Richard's plan to bring my algorithm to vector systems. Dr. Chen's expression grew darker with every detail. Finally, she spoke. Miss Patel, I want to be very clear about something. Vector Systems has been in preliminary discussions with a consultant about a new data processing system. We were told this consultant had developed the technology independently. We were never informed it was stolen from a competitor. My heart was racing. The consultant is Richard Brennan? She nodded grimly. He approached us 6 weeks ago, through a third-party contact. He's been scheduled to present his proprietary system to our board next week. 6 weeks ago. Right around the time he deleted my project. He'd been planning this for over a month. Dr. Chen leaned forward. Miss Patel, how would you like to handle this situation? This was the moment. The choice that would define everything that came next. I could ask her to simply reject Richard's proposal. That would stop him from profiting, but it wouldn't truly expose him. He could try again with another company. Other employees at Horizon Tech would continue suffering under his management. Or I could do something bigger. I want to be at that presentation, I said firmly. I want to be there when Richard tries to sell my work to your board. And I want to be the one who exposes him. Dr. Chen smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It was the smile of someone who appreciated good strategy. I think we can arrange that. But I should warn you, Miss Patel. What you're proposing will have significant consequences. For Richard, certainly. But also for you. Are you prepared for that? I thought about the past months. The late nights I'd worked on my project. The excitement I'd felt when I solved each complex problem. The devastation of seeing it all deleted. The fear and anger and determination that had carried me to this moment. I've already lost everything once, I said. I'm not afraid of consequences anymore. I'm only afraid of staying silent. We spent the next hour planning. Dr. Chen would allow Richard's presentation to proceed as scheduled. But I would be in the room. Introduced as a technical consultant, Vector Systems had brought in to evaluate the proposal. Richard wouldn't know I was there until it was too late. The presentation was scheduled for Friday afternoon. I had 5 days to prepare. 5 days to make sure I had every piece of evidence documented. 5 days to practice staying calm when I'd be face to face with the man who'd tried to destroy my career. I also made one more decision. I contacted a tech industry journalist I'd met at a conference years ago. Her name was Rachel Torres, and she'd built a reputation for exposing corruption and unethical practices in corporate America. I told her there was a major story developing, and she might want to be ready to cover it. I didn't give her details yet, but I promised they would be explosive. The remaining days crawled by. At work, I continued playing my role. The defeated employee. The woman who'd learned her lesson about challenging authority. Richard seemed satisfied with my compliance. He even made a comment about how I was finally showing better judgment. If only he knew what was coming. Thursday night, I barely slept. I kept rehearsing what I'd say, how I'd present my evidence, what I'd do if Richard tried to talk his way out of it. But mostly, I thought about the moment he'd realize he'd been caught, that every move he'd made to destroy me had actually built the trap he was about to walk into. Friday morning arrived. I called in sick to Horizon Tech. Richard would never know I wasn't there. He was too busy preparing for what he thought would be his big triumph. I dressed professionally, not for Richard, but for myself. I needed to feel powerful, in control, ready for the confrontation that would change everything. At 2 p.m., I walked into Vector Systems headquarters. Dr. Chen met me in the lobby and escorted me to their executive boardroom. It was impressive floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, a massive conference table, state-of-the-art presentation technology, and in exactly 30 minutes, Richard Brennan would walk through those doors, expecting a celebration. Instead, he was walking into an ambush. Dr. Chen briefed her board members on the situation. They were shocked, angry, and very interested in seeing how this would play out. I was positioned at the far end of the table where Richard wouldn't immediately see me when he entered. The plan was to let him begin his presentation before revealing I was there. At 2:28 p.m., my phone buzzed. Rachel Torres confirmed she was outside the building, ready to cover whatever story emerged. At 2:30 p.m. exactly, the boardroom door opened, and Richard Brennan walked into the room that would become his professional grave. Richard entered the Vector Systems boardroom with absolute confidence. He wore his most expensive suit and carried a laptop bag like he was about to change the world. He'd styled himself as a visionary consultant, someone bringing revolutionary technology to their doorstep. He didn't see me at first. I was positioned behind several board members, partially obscured. I watched as he shook hands with Dr. Chen, greeted the executives, and set up his presentation with practiced ease. This wasn't just a pitch to him, it was a coronation. "Thank you all for this opportunity," Richard began, his voice smooth and assured. "What I'm about to show you will fundamentally transform how Vector Systems processes client data. This algorithm represents 18 months of intensive research and development. It's cutting edge, it's tested, and it's ready for immediate implementation." 18 months. He'd added 6 months to my actual timeline, to make himself sound more impressive. I felt my jaw clench, but I stayed silent. "Not yet." Richard began walking through the presentation, and I watched in real time as he presented my work, my code structure, my innovative approaches to data compression, my solutions to processing bottlenecks. Even the visual diagrams he was showing were based on my original documentation. He'd barely changed anything except replacing my name with his own. The board members were engaged, asking technical questions. Richard answered them smoothly, using explanations I'd written in my own project notes months ago. He'd memorized my work well enough to defend it, but he didn't truly understand it. I could tell from the slight hesitations, the way he avoided the most complex technical details. After about 15 minutes, Dr. Chen interrupted him. "Mr. Brennan, this is all very impressive. But before we go further, I'd like to introduce someone who's been helping us evaluate technical proposals." Richard looked curious, but not concerned. "Of course. I'm happy to answer any technical expert's questions." Dr. Chen gestured toward me. "This is Maya Patel. She's a senior developer specializing in data processing algorithms. Maya, would you join us at the table?" I stood up and walked slowly toward the main conference table. It took Richard 3 full seconds to register who I was. I watched his face go through a series of expressions: confusion, recognition, shock, and finally, barely concealed panic. "Maya?" His voice cracked slightly. "What are you doing here?" I sat down directly across from him, maintaining eye contact. "I'm consulting for Vector Systems, Richard. Dr. Chen asked me to evaluate the technical authenticity of certain proposals. Isn't that interesting?" The room temperature seemed to drop. Richard's confident demeanor was cracking. "I don't understand. This is highly unusual. There's a clear conflict of interest here." Dr. Chen's voice was ice cold. "Mr. Brennan, the only conflict of interest in this room is yours. Please continue your presentation. I'm sure Miss Patel will have some very interesting questions when you're finished." Richard's hands were shaking slightly as he turned back to his laptop. He tried to continue, but the confidence was gone. He stumbled over explanations he'd delivered smoothly moments before. He kept glancing at me, trying to figure out how much I knew, what I'd told them. Finally, he finished the main presentation and asked if there were questions. Several board members looked at me expectantly. I opened my own laptop. "I do have some questions, Richard. Let's start with slide 7. You describe a recursive processing function here that handles large datasets. Can you explain the specific logic behind your optimization approach?" Richard stammered through an answer that was technically nonsense. He was parroting terms without understanding them. I smiled coldly. That's interesting, because the actual optimization uses a modified binary tree structure with priority-weighted node allocation. Would you like to explain how your version differs from that approach? He couldn't, because he didn't actually understand the work he was presenting. He'd stolen my documentation, but not my comprehension. I continued. Let me save everyone some time. This algorithm you're presenting isn't yours, Richard. It's mine. Every single line of code, every innovation, every solution. I developed this over 12 months while working at Horizon Tech. And you know I developed it because you were my supervisor. In fact, you sent me an email 3 months ago praising this exact work. Would you like me to read that email to everyone? The room erupted. Board members started talking over each other. Richard's face had gone white. Dr. Chen raised her hand for silence. Miss Patel, you're saying Mr. Brennan stole this technology from Horizon Tech and attempted to sell it to us as his own work? That's exactly what I'm saying. And I can prove it. For the next 30 minutes, I presented everything. The email chains showing Richard's knowledge of my project, my original development notes, and code samples, all time-stamped to prove I'd created them. Testimony from former Horizon Tech employees about Richard's pattern of sabotaging others' work. And finally, the conversation I'd overheard where Richard explicitly discussed bringing my algorithm to vector systems. With each piece of evidence, Richard sank deeper into his chair. He tried to defend himself at first, claimed I was lying, that I was a disgruntled employee, that my accusations were baseless. But the evidence was overwhelming, undeniable. Dr. Chen finally cut him off. Mr. Brennan, I've heard enough. Vector Systems has a zero-tolerance policy for corporate espionage and intellectual property theft. Not only will we not be moving forward with any agreement with you, but we'll be reporting this matter to Horizon Tech's leadership immediately. We'll also be recommending they pursue legal action against you. Richard's face went from white to red. You can't do this. You have no right. We have every right, Dr. Chen said sharply. You came into our company attempting to defraud us with stolen technology. Did you really think we'd ignore that? Richard turned to me, and for a moment I saw real desperation in his eyes. Maya, please. This is all a misunderstanding. We can work this out. I can help you get recognition for your work at Horizon Tech. I can make things right. I'd waited months for this moment, for the chance to look Richard Brennan in the eye and tell him exactly what he'd taken from me and how completely he'd failed to break me. You deleted my work, Richard. You tried to destroy a year of my life because I rejected your advances. You systematically crushed other employees who threatened your fragile ego. And then you tried to steal my creation and sell it for your own profit. There is no misunderstanding. There's only consequences. And you've earned every single one. Security escorted Richard from the building. As he walked past me, he hissed under his breath. You've ruined me. I didn't flinch. No, Richard. You ruined yourself. I just made sure everyone could see it. After he was gone, Dr. Chen turned to me. Miss Patel, Vector Systems would like to discuss licensing your algorithm, legitimately, with fair compensation and full credit to you as the creator. We'd also like to discuss the possibility of you joining our team. We could use someone with your skills and your integrity. I was stunned. In the span of an hour, I'd gone from sabotaged employee to sought-after consultant. I'll definitely consider that, Dr. Chen. Thank you. But I wasn't done yet. I still had one more move to make. I called Rachel Torres the moment I left Vector Systems. I gave her the entire story, every detail. She was practically vibrating with excitement by the time I finished. This wasn't just a workplace dispute. It was a story about corporate corruption, stolen intellectual property, and systematic abuse of power. Her article went live 3 days later. Senior supervisor at Horizon Tech caught stealing employees' work for competitor deal. It was detailed, devastating, and perfectly researched. Rachel had even gotten statements from Lisa, Marcus, and Jennifer, the other employees Richard had victimized. Their stories added weight to the narrative. This wasn't an isolated incident. It was a pattern. Horizon Tech's leadership had no choice but to respond. Richard Brennan was fired immediately. They launched an internal investigation into his conduct and discovered even more instances of misconduct, stolen credit for others' work, and inappropriate behavior toward female employees. Several lawsuits followed, both from the company for corporate espionage and from former employees for workplace harassment. Richard's reputation in the tech industry was destroyed. His LinkedIn profile went dark. His carefully built network of connections evaporated. The man who'd spent 12 years climbing the corporate ladder lost everything in less than a week. As for me, Vector Systems made me an incredible offer, not just to license my algorithm, but to join their team as a senior innovation lead. They tripled my Horizon Tech salary and gave me my own research team. My algorithm was implemented within 6 months and became one of Vector Systems' most valuable technological assets. But more than the money or the position, I got something more valuable: vindication, recognition, the knowledge that my work mattered, and that standing up for myself had been worth it. Several months later, I received a message from Lisa, one of Richard's former victims. She said that watching my story unfold had given her the courage to speak up about her own workplace mistreatment at her new company. She'd reported harassment, provided evidence, and seen real consequences. She thanked me for showing her that silence isn't safety, it's just another form of surrender. I heard similar stories from others: people who'd been intimidated, manipulated, or sabotaged by people in power. My experience became a reminder that abusers rely on their victims staying quiet. They count on fear and isolation. But when one person speaks up, it creates a ripple effect. It gives others permission to tell their own truths. Now, as I sit in my office at Vector Systems, leading a team of brilliant developers, I sometimes think about that morning when I discovered my deleted project. The devastation I felt, the fear, the rage. I remember thinking I'd lost everything, but I hadn't lost everything. I'd lost one version of my life. The version where I stayed small, stayed quiet, accepted mistreatment because fighting back seemed too risky. What I gained was something much more powerful. I gained the knowledge that I could rebuild, that I could strategize, that I could turn my worst professional nightmare into an opportunity to expose corruption and protect others from the same fate. Richard probably thought deleting my work would end my career. Instead, it launched it. His betrayal became my catalyst. His cruelty became my motivation. And his downfall? That became my greatest professional victory. Asterisk, asterisk. The moral? Asterisk, asterisk. When someone tries to destroy your work, your reputation, or your spirit, remember this: they can delete files, but they can't delete your knowledge. They can sabotage your projects, but they can't sabotage your skills. They can try to take credit for your achievements, but they can't take away your ability to create something even better. Revenge isn't always about destruction. Sometimes, the most powerful revenge is success. It's rebuilding what was broken and making it stronger. It's refusing to let someone else's cruelty define your worth. It's standing up not just for yourself, but for everyone who comes after you. Richard Brennan thought he was teaching me a lesson about power, but in the end, I taught him one instead. You can't keep good people down forever. Eventually, the truth surfaces. Justice finds its way, and those who built their success on lies and stolen valor, they fall harder than anyone. My year of work wasn't wasted. It was stolen, and I got it back with interest. That's not revenge. That's justice. And it changed everything.